It is a pleasure to be in front of you this morning. If you've been in the pews for any length of time, there's no question that at some point you've heard a lesson where somebody tries to convey the horror of crucifixion. Whether they try to describe physically what's going on as the body is hung there and gasping for breath, or as we try and contemplate emotionally, spiritually what Jesus is going through. And I think it's kind of like, I've been to the Grand Canyon, and I try to tell Jennifer, who hasn't, what it's like. But there's no way to describe that in words that conveys the picture properly. And I think it's like that no lesson, no words have been devised that can properly explain to us how horrible that death is. And I think all of us would say that if someone was being crucified, if someone was going through that sort of agony, we would not want to watch. We wouldn't want to be present for that. I know that I wouldn't. Mel Gibson made his movie, and I didn't see it, not because I had any moral objections to it, just I didn't have the stomach for it. To watch someone going through that sort of pain and agony, didn't want to do it. And so it's difficult when I look at passages like Luke 23, in verse 48, which describes that when Jesus is being murdered, there are crowds that come just because they want to see the show. They want to see the spectacle. And I can't identify with that's entertaining in any sense. That they're there because, it's a good show. It's something to do. We've got something to do for today. We're going to watch somebody get executed. But historically, we know that things like public executions, even in Roman times, the Colosseum, the Circus Maximus, those things existed, and they drew huge crowds, people wanting to watch other people suffer and die. But not being able to identify with that, it makes it that much harder for me to try to put myself into the shoes of a Roman soldier. Someone who not only has to watch, but whose job it is to put the nails in to somebody else. Whose job it is to hoist them up on this cross. Whose, if they're ordered to, has to break the legs of the condemned in order to speed the process along. And not only that, but has to be there to hear the cries, the agony of someone who's on a cross. It has to stay there and experience it. And I can't imagine that, how many times would you have to do that? How many times as a soldier would you have to pull crucifixion duty before it became commonplace? Before you became so jaded by the spectacle that it was just another day, that it didn't affect you, that it didn't bother you. And I can't imagine that ever happening to me. And yet we see in John chapter 19, John relays to us this scene that shows us just how jaded is the only word that these soldiers are to what they're doing to Jesus. In John 19, verse 23, it says, "The soldiers, therefore, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part, and also the coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. And they said therefore to one another, Let us not rend it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which saith, They parted my garments among them. And upon my vesture did they cast lots. These things, therefore, the soldiers did." And imagine the disrespect. Maybe a joke here and there. Well, he's not going to need the coat anymore. Laughter. That, hey, finally, we're going to get some nice stuff out of this. But apparently, because of the way that this tunic, this cloak is constructed, if they divide it up, they're going to ruin the fabric. They're going to ruin the cloth. So instead of that, they gamble. They cast lots. And now, one lucky soldier is going to get to go home with Jesus' cloak. Just one. And I want to ask the question this morning, we, knowing what we know about Jesus, knowing what we know is really going on that cross, and thinking about it, here's the question. If only one of us could walk out of here today clothed in Christ, how would you feel? If salvation was a lottery, and only one person, and God decreed one person could walk away clothed in Jesus, and everybody else was left out in the cold, would you despair? Thinking of all the people that would sign up, what would you do to try to make sure that you were that one person that could walk away clothed in Jesus? Just like this soldier. Paul asks a similar question to the Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 24, he pictures the Christian life as a race. And he says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." Paul imagines this race, and he says, hey, in most races, only one person gets to take home first. Only one person gets the prize. Today one person gets the green jacket. Today it's the ring. Only one team gets the ring. And second place gets a pat on the back and a bus ticket home. There's nothing else. Only one person gets the prize. And he comes to the conclusion, are you running as if only one person is getting salvation? And how hard would you run if you knew that that truly was the case? That only one of us was going to walk out of here with the prize. Only one of us was going to walk out of here with salvation. And Paul tells us in this passage what it takes to run as if there's only one prize. Run as if that we want salvation. First, he says in verse 25, self-control. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. I know, probably obvious, I know very little about athletes or athletics. Someone had to remind me that the Super Bowl was today, because I didn't know and didn't care. But imagine being an athlete. In college I took golf and bowling because I figured those would be the two least strenuous things I could take, and I was deeply disappointed by golf. That was a lot more strenuous than I expected it was going to be. But imagine you're going to the Olympics, and you're going to run this race, and you're training for it. You eat only what you know is going to make you stronger. All the things that you maybe love, all the things that are delicious, but you know are going to weigh you down and hold you back, you put those things aside. You train. Every step you take, everything you do is meant to bring you towards that goal. And anything that slows you down, you jettison. Your schedule, your training, your diet, everything is wrapped up towards that goal. And even if it's something you love, if it's not heading towards that goal, then you get rid of it because you're training for the big race. And that's what matters. That's the only thing that's important, not these other things that are weighing you down. So Paul says, I am self-controlled. Every facet of your life, is every facet of our life managed just to the question, is it getting me towards heaven? Or do we hold on to things that we love that may be dragging us back, but we hold on to them even though just because we love them and we want them, but they're not getting us to heaven? Second, in verse 25, he says, remember what it is that you're running for. He says, they do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. And athletes are different. They run for different reasons. Run for a medal. Run for the praise that you're going to get from the crowds. Run for the satisfaction, the thrill of crossing that finish line first and knowing that you won. People run for different reasons, but thrills fade. The crowd is fickle at best. And the medal, at the end of the day, you won't be kneeling before God in eternity wearing that thing, saying, look what I did in that race. It doesn't last. But we race for an eternal prize. We race for an eternal home. And that means those sacrifices, those things that we get rid of, that we jettison from our lives because they're not helping us, those sacrifices are all worth it because we know what we're running for. If we can kneel before God in judgment and hear Him say to us, well done, then the things we sacrificed for the cause of Christ will be completely forgotten. And all that will be left is the joy of knowing that we are home and that we are with Him. So Paul says, you want to know how I run? He says in verse 26, so I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Paul says, you want to know how I run? I run with purpose. I'm not running this way and that way, hoping I accidentally find the path to heaven. I'm taking the straightest, fastest way, straight as an arrow, right towards Jesus, right towards heaven, right towards the prize. He says, I'm not a boxer swinging wildly, hoping I accidentally hit something. Paul is focused, disciplined, and self-controlled with every thought, word, and deed, taking him one step closer to the prize. Now, the joy of Jesus' sacrifice is that there's not just one prize. The fact is, every man and woman and child who's ever lived has been offered that prize. And there's no reason that every one of us sitting here today can't reach the finish line, can't be in a home in heaven. But if we take His love and mercy for granted, if we think we'll stroll into heaven instead of running into heaven flat out, but if we think we're going to stumble into heaven, then we will miss the prize that Jesus died to give us. So as we take our motivation from the sacrifice that this table reminds us of, let us remember that we are running a race into heaven. Let us run flat out with all our mind, our might, our soul, our strength, as if only one of us was going to take that prize home with us.